and United States relations, which are rooted in a long history and a very active current relationship. Our guest, the ambassador, is a product of a European education, and her first major degree is from University of Antwerp in Russian and English studies, politics and economics, and her master's degree from Suffolk University is in Russian studies. And interestingly, she, after what appears to be enjoyable years, worked in the Moscow Embassy of the Netherlands as assistant to the counselor for agriculture, and then a year later joined the Foreign Service. She was assigned early in her career to Bangladesh, to Suriname, and then to Washington, D.C. In going back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, she headed up recruitment and training, and then was Deputy Chief of Mission to Prague. Coming back to the Netherlands, she served as coordinator for the group that was coordinating and managing the Security Council relationship, the Netherlands having a temporary seat for 2 years on the Security Council of the United Nations. She was then Ambassador at Large for Human Rights, and then first Deputy Director General and then Director General for the Office of Regional Policy and Consular Affairs, which, as I've been informed, is the equivalent of an Undersecretary of State position here. When you say regional policy, you're talking about all the regions of the world. So it's an integrative and oversight position, which is most impressive. And then, of course, she was appointed as Ambassador to the United States of America. And it's in that capacity that it's my great pleasure to welcome Regina Jones-Bos, Ambassador of the Netherlands to the United States. By the way, we're beginning the program with a very short 2-minute film on the Netherlands, and then the ambassador will speak.
Distinguished members of the board and ladies and gentlemen, it is such an incredible honor and pleasure for me to be here today in Baltimore, and what a wonderful turnout and what a lot of interest. Thank you so much for being here. I'm here to discuss Dutch-American relations and maybe Dutch-Baltimore relations a little bit as well. And I think the United States and the Netherlands have a lot in common, and I'll be very happy tonight to share a little bit of that with you. I'll start with some remarks on Dutch-American shared history, and then I'll touch on Dutch-US trade relations, and then finally I'll go into the joint efforts that we, both the United States and the Netherlands, are undertaking in the terms of prosperity, peace, and principles throughout the world. And I'll try to make it as short as possible because I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions and to have some time for the question and answer session as well. Well, first, let's start with a little bit of history. As you might know, we are celebrating the 400th anniversary of Dutch-American friendship this year with a large number of commemorations, events and activities. And if you want to know more about it, we have a website, ny400.org, and it does work, I can assure you. And you can see all the activities and events that we're undertaking. But what exactly are we celebrating this year? Well, in 1609, a Dutch East India Company vessel, and maybe you know the Dutch East India Company, it was a trading company of the Netherlands. The vessel called the Halve Maan, skippered by an English captain, Captain Hudson, arrived at the site of what is now Manhattan, the heart of New York City. And the Dutch seized upon the opportunity to establish the colony of New Netherlands. And New Netherlands extended from Delaware to Connecticut. And at the heart of this colony was the town of New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island. And many of the Dutch settlers came from places such as Amsterdam, Leiden, The Hague, Rotterdam, but also from Haarlem, Brooklyn, Breukelen, and Flushing, Vlissingen. It's all in a name. From the very early stages onward, New Netherlands was a multi-ethnic and multi-religious colony, based on the principles of freedom, democracy, open-mindedness, and the rule of law. Just like we like to think in our home country. All, of course, we have to be historically honest within the relative terms of the 17th century. The settlement quickly established an extensive fur trade with the Native Americans. And in a short period of time, New Amsterdam developed into a major port for trade in the North Atlantic, with transshipment of goods between the North American interior, the Caribbean, the English colonies of New England and Virginia, and Europe. And this progressive spirit of trade, entrepreneurship, open-mindedness are the Dutch legacies that can be found today in New York, and we like to think across the wider US. And there's a very interesting book by an American writer called Russell Shorto. Some of you may know it. It's called Island at the Center of the World, and it describes the early Dutch influence in New Amsterdam, New Netherlands. And his theory is that some of these traits like tolerance, open-mindedness, religious freedom, which you did not find in all the colonies at the time, do date back and come back from the Dutch inheritance. In 1729, when the New Netherlands colony had already been taken over by the English, and as you can imagine, my husband, who's British, and I have many discussions about it. We fought many Anglo-Dutch wars. The city of Baltimore was founded. Ships from many places, including, of course, Dutch merchants, soon started to call on the city's port, even if the British overlords wanted the colonies to trade only with the mother country. Then came the American Revolution, and like many American cities, Baltimore refused to pay British taxes. In retaliation, the British blocked the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The trading city of Baltimore suffered greatly. But meanwhile, in the Netherlands, Dutch public opinion was solidly backing the Americans, who were revolting against the British. And as I just said, the British were our big enemies at the time as well. Then a private Dutch citizen, a merchant, Klaas Taan, decided to intervene on his own account. And in 1781, he broke through the British blockade of the Chesapeake with a fleet of 18 merchant vessels, carrying grain and other much-needed commodities into the port of Baltimore. After independence, Baltimore quickly developed into a major manufacturing center, leading port of entry for commodities and immigrants to the United States. And today, you really feel, and I was just shown by Dr. Burd, the port of Baltimore, the beautiful views from this building here, and you feel the energy of a trading city. And I can say it here because I'm sure there's nobody from Washington around now. Washington is a beautiful city, but it's a government city like The Hague. And here in Baltimore, you feel the trading blood. If there is one city in the Netherlands that we can compare with Baltimore, it has to be the city of Rotterdam. Like Baltimore, Rotterdam is a major harbor city, proud of its down-to-earth working ethic and a gateway to the hinterland of the European continent. Rotterdam, as you may know, is still by far the largest port of Europe, and in fact it's one of the largest ports in the world still. Given their similarities, it's no coincidence that Baltimore and Rotterdam have been sister cities since 1985. Both cities are of critical importance to their nations' economies and development. But there are more similarities. Both cities have also had to deal with industrial decline and had to revitalize their economies. Furthermore, cities that are open to the world, like Baltimore and Rotterdam, have always attracted many people from different places and different backgrounds. This diversity forms, I would say, an enriching and essential characteristic of internationally oriented cities. At the same time, we cannot deny that tensions do occur and that maintaining social cohesion can be a challenge, and I'll say a few words about that later on in my talk. Both Baltimore and Rotterdam are continuously making efforts to remain cities that are inspiring places to live in. And even if the challenges remain, both have made remarkable achievements in this field. In the case of Baltimore, as I just said, you just have to look through the window and we see a lively waterfront area that not only improves the lives of the quality of the life of the city's inhabitants, but also attracts large numbers of visitors from all parts of the nation and the world. And in fact, Dr. Burd, you mentioned that we were here before on an assignment, and our children were very small then, and one of the first places we came to, with my parents in tow as well, was the port area here, the inner harbor in Baltimore, to see the aquarium with the children, and they greatly liked it. Baltimore set also the standard to bring baseball stadiums with Camden Yards, which we just passed as well, bring them back to the inner city and give the national pastime a rightful place in the heart of the community. And likewise, two of the most emblematic soccer stadiums in the Netherlands are located within the city limits of Rotterdam. Trade and investment between the Netherlands and the United States is of vital importance to cities like Baltimore and Rotterdam, which both owe their very existence to international trade. And I don't want to bore you with too many numbers here, but let me just state that my country, the Netherlands, is the seventh largest export market for US goods, and we are the only EU country with a significant trade deficit with the US. So you export more to us than we to you. The Netherlands is also the fourth largest foreign investor in the United States, the fourth. Dutch companies in the USA employ hundreds of thousands of Americans, and we've tried to put a number on it, and that's of course always very difficult. But we've now worked out that it's at least 700,000, if not more. And that is, I think, more than the entire population of the city of Baltimore. Dutch investment in the United States is primarily in the services, chemical, telecom, and electronics sector. But the Netherlands is the second largest foreign investor in the United States in the financial and insurances industry. Now, all these figures, certainly the financial industry, are moving very rapidly at the moment, but we still have some very large banks like ING very active here, and its subsidiary ING Direct, which is doing very well and build up within a few years from 0 customers to now, I think, 7 million all across the United States. Vice versa, the United States is the third largest investor in the Netherlands. The Netherlands has a skilled workforce, excellent infrastructure, a strategic location, as well as a reputation for strong R&D capabilities. I don't know if I should say that after the disaster with the little film, but in the Netherlands they do it much better than we do it here at the embassy. It's no coincidence that many American companies like Cisco Systems, Nike, and ExxonMobil Benelux chose the Netherlands as a gateway to Europe and a location for their European headquarters. So we as an embassy network work very hard to attract more American investment to the Netherlands, because we think it's very good for our employment to have your investment in the Netherlands, and it's good for your employment here to have Dutch investment in the United States. The Netherlands, highly integrated as it is into the world economy, is also touched by the current financial and economic crisis. My government, like the US, is fully committed to providing a vigorous, well-balanced and internationally coordinated response to this crisis. all the meetings of the G20 plus, because I don't know if you saw it, but when the first G20 meeting took place in Washington, there was a little footnote saying plus Spain and the Netherlands. So we managed to work our way into the G20 because we are the 16th economy of the world. We are in the top 10 of financial centers. We are a very active contributor to development cooperation. In fact, we are the 4th largest donor to the United Nations system. So we thought, well, we have a stake in this and we think we should be present. So the G20 plus in Washington last fall and in London this spring. And the Netherlands has made significant contributions to this international debate. At the national level, of course, our government had to take measures as well. For example, banks that were in trouble got a capital injection from the Dutch government. Measures were taken in terms of credit insurance for exports for companies. The government also has a small stimulus package, not as big as the one of the United States. But then we do have other elements, other factors which we call the automatic stabilizers. That means when unemployment rises, unemployment benefits go up automatically in the Netherlands. So it means that people still have their spending power. So it's a way the government budget grows bigger, but you give people the opportunity to still pay for their food, for their consumption, and you try to keep the economy going that way. Now, and I think it's also good maybe to mention here that contrary to public belief, I've read it in quite a few papers, Europe is not doing anything in terms of stimulus. Europe just does regulation. The US does a lot in terms of stimulus and does less in regulation. I think neither of those two statements are true. I think Europe has done more in stimulus. I think in terms of GNP percentage, it's something like 5%, which is pretty much in line with what the US has done. But the way both sides of the Atlantic go about it is slightly different. Well, our Prime Minister visited here last September when I just arrived in the United States, and he gave a talk for the Foreign Policy Council in New York. And he was introduced by the former Shell representative to the United States, who said, do you know a country in the world that has less than 4% unemployment, that has a balanced budget and even a bit of a budget surplus, that has actually sound economic growth? He came up with a lot of these facts and figures, and our Prime Minister got a very big applause. And then he said, you know, why does this never happen to me when I tell these very same things in the Dutch parliament? They only grumble at me. But anyway, our position was very good. But this was before the economic crisis hit the United States very hard and hit Europe very hard as well. So we still are doing pretty well in terms of unemployment. We're at about 4.6% now. But it's likely to go up. I think after the summer we will see an increase, and we expect 2009, 2010 to be difficult years. We have a growing budget deficit, unfortunately, because the government was very determined to not let the budget deficit get too big. But, you know, you have to give a few percentage points to get us through this difficult financial times. And the growth outlook for this year is negative, which we haven't had for many, many years. But we hope for 2010 will pick up again. So the economic downturn is a reality also in the Netherlands. It's not the only difficulty that we are facing as a country at the moment. You may also have heard about the immigration pressures on Dutch society. We used to be for a very long time a very homogeneous society. And then for the last, I think, 2-3 decades, we've had increased immigration from countries like Turkey, Morocco, but also Somalia. We had a very generous asylum system, political asylum system, but we also had immigrants who came to work in the lower skilled jobs. And people at the time thought that, you know, those workers would come and then go back to their own countries and we would all go back to where we were. But of course, that's now not how it happens with immigration. And we now have, out of a population of 16 million Dutch people, 1 million new immigrants, mainly of Muslim origin. And that does create tensions in society, and the government is trying to deal with that, and I think people are trying to deal with it. But that maybe explains some of the things you might read about the Netherlands and immigration. And during the question and answer, we can go further into that. Anyway, back to the economy. And I think that over a period of 4 centuries, the economies of the Netherlands and the United States have always been very intertwined. Trade and investment between our two countries create jobs, promote innovation, and increase prosperity. And especially in this difficult economic climate, the Netherlands is eager to continue this partnership with the United States and to foster open markets and free trade. It's crucial that progress be made in furthering the WTO agenda in the Doha round, and we very, very passionately believe that this is no time for protectionism, because with protectionism, in the end, we will all be worse off. Trade and investment play a pivotal role in the cooperation between the Netherlands and the United States, but yet our relationship is much broader. And just to give you an example, at our embassy in Washington, D.C., we have representatives from almost all Dutch ministries, so departments, and that is, you know, in the areas of education, economics, agriculture, health, defense, a very large defense department, a very good defense cooperation, but also environment, and last but not least, water management. Just after the big Katrina hurricane and disaster, the Dutch engineers were one of the first to come with their pumps and to help out the people of New Orleans with pumping out the water. And we're now working with New Orleans on, you know, water management, strengthening the levees, working with the river and the dikes. But the cooperation also extends, very importantly, to foreign and security policy. And Dutch foreign policy, I think, can be typified by the 3 Ps. We had a former Minister of Defense, Joris Voorhoeven, in fact, the former boss of my husband, Richard, and he wrote his PhD on Dutch foreign policy. And his PhD was called Peace, Profits and Principles. And these 3 Ps sum up very nicely the foreign policy objectives of the Netherlands. The Netherlands, as you know, is a founding member of NATO. It's also a founding member of the European Union and a founding member of the United Nations. As you can gather, we believe in multilateralism. It's an approach that works for us. But NATO has always been extremely important for us. And we have regarded the transatlantic relationship, the alliance with the United States, as the cornerstone of our security policy. Not only in Europe, but also by standing up for our shared values in other places of the world. And our commitment to the stabilization, reconstruction, and development in Afghanistan is maybe a case in point in this regard. With almost 2,000 Dutch troops stationed in the southern province of Uruzgan, which is the Taliban heartland and a very difficult southern part of Afghanistan, we contribute significantly to the security needed for Afghan reconstruction and development. Alongside our military effort, and as I said, our military work very well together with the US military, the Netherlands has also contributed some $400 million in the past few years for Afghan reconstruction. And we are focusing even stronger on the need to improve governance and service delivery to the Afghans by their own authorities. This can only happen in safe and secure surroundings, which not only means neutralizing the Taliban, but also assisting to establish the rule of law, to build up a police force, and to provide timely and predictable justice. Finally, we are also supporting Afghanistan by political means, and we organized not so long ago, on the 31st of March, together with the United Nations, a big conference in The Hague, with all parties involved in Afghanistan, not just the NATO allies, just to see what can we do to make sure that this country gets back on its own feet. So the shared values of the Netherlands and the United States are also reflected in our joint efforts to promote human rights worldwide. And you will allow me, as a former ambassador at large for human rights, to say a few words on this subject that's close to my heart. The Netherlands takes international human rights very seriously. We subsidize many grassroots projects throughout, We speak up for human rights in multilateral agencies and in bilateral contexts. And we aim to set an example in our own country. And we know we are certainly not perfect, but we're always willing to listen to well-founded critique that others may have and that others do have. Because just like many countries in the world, we have UN inspectors also coming to look at how we deal with human rights issues. Moreover, we contribute to international order and justice by being the host nation of a number of international courts, like the International Court of Justice, which is in The Hague, the International Criminal Court, the ad hoc tribunals for the former Yugoslavia, for Sierra Leone, and recently also for the Lebanon. And I dare say, in the field of human rights, my country is working very hard and trying to punch above its weight. And all those international legal institutions are settled in The Hague. And that's why the mayor of The Hague, who visited us recently, likes to call The Hague the international legal capital of the world. Well, this being said, I think no single country has contributed more to the promotion of human rights than the United States of America. Without the United States, there would be no free world, no United Nations, and no Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I remember with how much pleasure I read the biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, who played such an incredibly important role in bringing about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if you haven't read the book by Mary Ann Glendon called A World Made New, Eleanor Roosevelt and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I can recommend that book to you because it paints a very nice picture of how the First Lady went after the Second World War on a boat trip to London, where the first United Nations session was held. And she said, she wrote to her daughter, well, I'm now going to start on this journey. She never had been a civil servant, of course, before, although always very active in all kinds of fields. And I'm going to get something that is called a briefing. Goodness knows what that will be. Anyway, I think throughout its history, America has commanded respect from other nations as a beacon of the universal values of liberty and justice. And I think President Obama said it very nicely, that the world has always been very impressed by the power of America's example, and more so than by the example of America's power. Therefore, we welcome the new administration's perspective on human rights, and in particular, I hope that the Human Rights Council, which has not yet fulfilled its promise, can be reinvigorated with America's new commitment and participation, because the United States, as from September, will again be a member of the Human Rights Council. And we also very much welcome President Obama's intent to put an end to the situation that the United States is only one of 2 countries that hasn't ratified yet the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. And the other country that hasn't done so yet is Somalia. And one of only 8 that has not yet ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So, ladies and gentlemen, the United States and the Netherlands are the best of friends, and I think we have been so for a very long time, and I feel serving here and having served here before that we also have very much in common. From the first salute, when the Netherlands, as the first foreign country, recognized America as a separate and independent sovereign nation by saluting the flag. This was from the Dutch Caribbean island of St. Eustatius, and Barbara Tuchman wrote a very nice book about that. To the present day, we remain one of America's closest allies. Our relation goes beyond mere shared interests. We have a shared history, and we have shared values. And that is why we work together. For prosperity, through intensive trade and investment relations, which are so important also for a city like Baltimore. For peace, working together in NATO and standing shoulder to shoulder in Afghanistan. And for principles, by promoting human rights and international justice. And as we begin this 5th century of friendship and cooperation, we very much appreciate what was, what is, and what is still to come. So thank you so much for your attention. I've tried to say a little bit about the 3 Ps, and I'd be very happy to take your questions and to go into other subjects that might be of interest to you. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you for a comprehensive and very interesting overview of the Netherlands positions as well as our relationships with the Netherlands. Yes, sir. The question is, given the Dutch generosity in accepting people under various difficult conditions, how then can it be seen as homogeneous?
I think that's a very good point and a very good question. I think maybe the word homogeneous was a wrong word. We have had centuries of tradition of being open to refugees from all over the world. And you mentioned some of the groups that came to the Netherlands, and that is absolutely true. And we've always happily received people from all over the world. And I think they have also contributed a lot to the development of the Netherlands. So it enriched our society. But these were always fairly small in numbers and fairly highly educated groups. And I think the difference with the immigration we've had over the last 20, 30 years is that it was very large numbers and very uneducated groups. We're talking about a lot of people who couldn't even read or write coming to the Netherlands. And I think the earlier groups that came, we never had any problem taking them in and making them part of society because they were also people who wanted to become part of society. And what we saw with the groups that came in, as I said initially, the thought was, well, they come temporarily and then will go back to their own countries. And before we knew it, you know, we were 10, 20 years further on, and we had large groups in our cities. It was, of course, mainly the big cities where the immigrants went to, with whole areas of places like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, where people didn't speak the Dutch language, where people weren't having a job, where the wives and the children that came, because we had a very liberal family reunification program, so anybody who came to the Netherlands could bring their wives, and then the next generation would bring new spouses from Turkey and Morocco. It's mainly those two countries, I think, that I'm talking about. So we had a whole influx of illiterate people, and through the Dutch welfare system, they could survive and manage in the Netherlands, but they didn't really participate in society. And I think it took the government too long to really realize that. You know, it was simmering under the surface. And what happened in 2001, we had a Dutch politician, Pim Fortuyn, and he really, vocalized, or he came up with the trouble that people in the big cities felt. Because in whole areas of Amsterdam and Rotterdam, you couldn't speak Dutch anymore. You know, the language was Turkish or Berber, one of the Moroccan languages. The face of the city had changed. The schools were suddenly, not suddenly, I mean, it grew over years, but they were schools mainly consisting of immigrant children rather than of Dutch children. And I think that is what I meant. It was a fairly quick influx. It was an influx of people who did not immediately participate in society. And I think the Netherlands were too slow in realizing that this was a different kind of immigration than what we had before. And now you're left with larger groups of people and people that feel alienated from the Netherlands, and the original Dutch population that feels alienated from those new immigrants. And that is why I was trying to say we have to find a new balance in our society to bring those groups in and to bring the two groups together.
The question is, would you compare the possibility of morphing the Muslim population into a force for moderation in the larger Muslim community, or do you see instead the Dutch society being altered?
I think at the moment we're in a transition phase in the Netherlands, and I'm an optimist. And I see a lot of example of what you call morphing. So one of the most impressive politicians that we have at the moment is our junior minister for immigration. And she is a lady of Turkish origin called Nebahat Albayrak. And she's very smart, and she's a very good example for her community. And she's, doing a very good job as a minister in the Netherlands. The mayor of Rotterdam, the sister city that I mentioned, is Ahmed Abu Taleb. He is of Moroccan origin, and he is one of the most skillful politicians we have in the Netherlands. So, I see so many good examples coming up of those new immigrants that work their way up in society and are very good examples to their communities. But there's also still groups that are lagging behind. So I think what we have to do is have to make an effort to make sure that everybody gets education. That is the basis of everything. People need to be able to have a good education. And with education, you can participate in the workforce. I think we have to make an extra effort to give people entry in the workforce. The Dutch have their networks and know where to go. When you're an immigrant, it's always harder to get in. And I think America is really an immigrant society in the very true sense of the word. I mean, everybody came from outside here, and everybody knew they had to work their way up to make something of themselves coming here. The Netherlands has had a lot of immigration of political refugees through the centuries, but is not an immigrant society as such. So our social security system was built up for a more closed society, you know. Everybody who comes and doesn't have a job gets unemployment benefit. And that is based on the fact that people basically work, but only if you can't work, you get that benefit. So all those things we are adjusting. So I think we are going through a transition, and my hope is, and my expectation is that with the good examples we have now from the immigrant society, and also with the example that we still have in the Netherlands, we might make it and turn it into a very positive experience. But we are not there yet, because there's also a lot of people who feel uncomfortable with the way society has developed.
How does the economic implosion impact upon human rights and the immigrant population?
I think economic implosion of not, you have to stick to your human rights obligations. We are all member of the European Council, the Council of Europe, which is a human rights organization. There's a court also for human rights in Strasbourg. So if the countries that are a member of the Council of Europe do not stick to their obligations, citizens can take governments to the court. So, you know, there's a certain stick behind the door to stick to its obligation. Of course, the economic crisis has an impact on employment. And I think unemployment always hits the most vulnerable groups the hardest. So that will be the immigrant population. But as I explained, we do have a system of social security. So people who get unemployed will get social security benefits from the state to survive. And I think education is there. Education is free for up to the age of 16. And we have a healthcare system, but maybe you've studied that as well. We had a big change in our healthcare system in the Netherlands a couple of 2 years ago, but we do have universal coverage for everybody in the Netherlands. So it shouldn't affect the economic and social rights. So people get unemployment benefits and they get healthcare. And I think it might affect their employment position. But not in terms of violations of their human rights. That is certainly something that the Dutch government would really want to try to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Would you comment upon terrorism in the Netherlands and Dutch colonies in the world?
Well, we have the Kingdom of the Netherlands, to start with your last question. And the Kingdom of the Netherlands used to consist of various parts in the world. We territories in Indonesia, Suriname, the Netherlands, Antilles, and the Netherlands. Indonesia became independent in 1947. As you know, the Netherlands, Antilles, and Suriname, we always said after the war, it's up to you. Decide what you want to do. Suriname decided to go for independence and got the independence in 1975. The Netherlands Antilles, where I was there last week because it's also part of our responsibility, have decided through referendum to stay part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So it's a voluntary, it's their choice, their self-determination. They have autonomy in terms of the local, their local laws, so they have their own school system, they run their own economy, they have their own tax, their own parliament, their own government. But foreign policy, defense policy, and overall kingdom matters are still the responsibility of the government in the Netherlands. But so we still do have overseas territories, if you want to call it that way. But I don't think the Antilles would like to be called colonies because they are part of the kingdom on their own free choice. And we always like to say here, we're a Caribbean nation because we have the Caribbean part of our kingdom. We're neighboring Venezuela and a lot of parts in the Caribbean. On your first question, terrorism, we have extremism, homegrown extremism in the Netherlands as well. We had a couple of terrible incidents. I mentioned Pim Fortuyn, the Dutch politician. He was killed in 2001 by an animal rights activist. So terrorism can come from many different directions. And we had a murder of Theo van Gogh, the Dutch filmmaker, in 2004. And he was killed by a Moroccan youth. And really for his statements, his pronouncements, that were considered to be too critical of Islam. So yes, we have, because of the tensions in our society, I think there's homegrown extremism in every country in the world now, also every country in Europe. And we work, our police and intelligence and justice authorities work to try and go against that. But we also very much believe in, as I said, education, making people feel part of society and counteract alienation. Internationally, I think the fight against terrorism is by participating in Afghanistan, where the headquarters of Al-Qaeda were located, and we fight shoulder to shoulder there with the American forces against extremism in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. But it's very difficult, and it moves all around the world. I mean, you have events in Yemen and things happening in Somalia, and it can move, of course, very quickly. And we believe in fighting extremism in a combination of helping countries to do better, to develop, and to feel part of the world system. And that's why we attach so much importance to development cooperation, and at the same time go after extremist forces, with all the tools we have at our disposal, but always in cooperation with other countries like the United States.
Would you describe the relations between Indonesia and the Netherlands today?
I think I would describe them as excellent. We had our difficult years, of course, after independence, because we thought we were doing a good job there, and the Indonesians looked at it very differently. But I have to say, I think already over the last 10, 20 years, but particularly it was 2 years ago, the then foreign minister was Minister Burd, and he was born in Indonesia. And he was in one of the Japanese camps in Indonesia. And so he came as a little boy back to the Netherlands, and then he studied and he joined the Foreign Service, and he became foreign minister at the end. And he had a very good relationship with the Indonesian Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he was the first Dutch foreign minister who went over, especially to Jakarta, for Independence Day. And of course, Independence Day, the relations had been settled and good, but Independence Day was always a bit of a sensitive day. But Minister Burd went there for Independence Day, recognizing the choice that the Indonesians made at the time. And he arrived at the airport in Jakarta, and Foreign Minister Wirayuda of Indonesia was there, and he was at the airport at the bottom of the stairs, and he said, "Welcome home," because it was the country of his birth. And I think he really contributed to making those relations excellent. And we work together in many ways. And there's so many people still of Indonesian origin in the Netherlands, so many family ties. The Indonesians still have their criminal code, for example, they call Wetboek van Strafrecht, based on the Dutch criminal code. So the ties are very close, and I think, if anything, getting closer.
Would you summarize and comment upon your experience with drugs in the Netherlands?
Well, drugs are my experience.
That was not a personal question. That was clumsier than I thought I was capable of.
It took me a minute to realize. Very briefly, drugs are against the law in the Netherlands as well. But we have a policy of tolerating limited use of soft drugs for medical reasons, but also for, because we think if you criminalize, if you go after that, you create a market and you make the situation probably worse than it is. So what we have, we go after the hard drug users, we go after the drug traders, both soft drugs and hard drugs, but the users of soft drugs, we don't go too actively, we don't pursue them too actively. What we think has happened in the Netherlands is that crime as a result of drug use has gone down. We have petty theft, petty crime has gone down. We keep hard drug users under very tight control, so heroin and cocaine and others, through government medical programs. And by keeping that under control, we also diminish crime as a result of the need for drugs. So I don't have the facts at my fingertips, but I do know that through a controlled way of going about it, through going after the dealers and the traders, but not all the individual users, we do manage to keep drug use under control. Apparently, the figures in the Netherlands are lower of drug use than they are in any other European country. And crime as a result of drugs, so stealing, petty theft, to meet the demands, and the health risks as a result of drugs are lower in the Netherlands than in other European countries. So it's a little bit of a pragmatic approach. It's not that we approve of it or that it's legal. It's that we let some individual consumers go their own way, and we go after the big traders and dealers.
This is a follow-up to the drug question. What have you enjoyed most in your career in the Foreign Service?
Well, first of all, thank you for the cruise ships. There's many nice things that I haven't mentioned because I only had 20 minutes to talk. So if in the course of the conversation we come up with other things. What did I enjoy best? All the things you do are so different. And that is still one of the wonderful things about the Foreign Service, that it gives you the opportunity to travel to so many different places and to do so many different things with different nations, nationalities. I think the most challenging job I did was being Ambassador at Large for Human Rights, because I traveled to a lot of countries. I think I traveled to at least 60 countries as diverse as Iran. I was there a couple of times, China, Russia, the Eastern Congo, Colombia. I went into the interior, the Magdalena Medio, Guatemala, but all over the world, really. And what we try to do with our embassies across the world, like you do, I think in the American Foreign Service as well, is support human rights initiatives, support non-government organizations, support women's groups. I always try to visit whatever country I was, women's groups. So you try to support local initiatives. But at the same time, I also always had talks and consultations with the governments. And we felt it our obligation, if we thought that there were problems with the human rights situation, to bring that to the attention and to discuss that with the local authorities. And that's why all the travel I did in that period, I always felt like a heavy weight and a responsibility, both because it's often difficult to broach with foreign governments the issue of human rights. And people have different views and thoughts, but what I found most difficult is meeting with human rights organizations who often in such difficult circumstances are the only ones who keep the population going. The Eastern Congo is a totally devastated war area where rape is an instrument of war. And you talk to a small human rights organizations who set up a small clinic for women that had been raped, who tried to intervene with the warlords, to release people who had been abducted or kidnapped. And it's so incredibly brave what the people do. And you can help them with a little bit of money, and you can help them, through support of Dutch organizers. But you go back home to the nice country of the Netherlands, and you leave them behind in the Eastern Congo or the Magdalena Medio. And I found that a very difficult part of the job. And at the same time, you have the feeling that by paying attention to the people there, and that's what they often said to me. I sometimes felt you leave them behind, but they said, well, the fact that people come and visit and talk to us and talk about us in New York, in Geneva, in Amsterdam, helps us as well. So I think I found that the most challenging, the most interesting, but the most rewarding maybe in the end of all the things I did. And of course I haven't finished my term here yet, so I'll say something more about that in 4 years' time. Yeah.
How concerned are you about global warming?
We are very concerned about global warming, what with the country being 2/3 under sea level. We had a massive flood in 1953. And then a big plan was made, after the floods had ebbed away, to build a whole system of dikes and levees and dunes along the coast, because we have a very long sea coast. The delta works, you may have seen them. And they're a great feat of engineering. And recently, about a year ago, we had a commission that looked at the situation of our levees and dikes and dunes, the Commission Veerman, a former Minister of Agriculture, and they've come with a whole host of recommendations what we need to do to be safe for rising water levels. And so we have a master plan now that is being worked out, and it's a whole integrated approach. It's giving space to rivers, because the water is not only at the sea, it also comes from Germany, Switzerland, France, and Russia's, we're a delta, so it comes down the delta. So you can't just make the levees higher and higher, you also have to give space to the water. So there's an awful lot of thinking and engineering that has gone into this and will go into this, and we're going to have a big master plan and a program the next 10 years or so to make ourselves ready for rising sea levels. And that's why we've developed so much skill in that terrain, and we'd like to share that with other countries. And in fact, Senator Landrieu from Louisiana and Lisa Jackson, EPA administrator, were in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago to look at water and how we deal with water and what we can do together in that field.
Would you comment upon the Wilder problem?
Yeah. Okay, we have a politician in the Netherlands called Geert Wilders, and he set up a party which he calls the Freedom Party. He has an agenda. His big concern is that Islam will flood Europe, and that our societies will change as a result of that. And he has the feeling that in the Netherlands and in Europe, he doesn't have the total freedom of speech. And he always looks at the United States. He visits here quite often as well, because you have the First Amendment. You can say whatever you want in the United States. And in the Netherlands, that's not the case. There are certain things, the Holocaust, or things that insult certain religious or certain individuals or feelings. So we have certain limitations on we have freedom of speech, but there are restrictions in the law. And if somebody feels that he has been injured psychologically or physically by the speech of somebody, you can go to the judge, and the judge will then decide if you have a case in law or not. And Mr. Wilders thinks it would be better to have total freedom of speech like you have here in the United States. I think every country has developed its own traditions. You have your tradition, and it works here, although I remember we were watching the television after the attack in the Holocaust Museum. And I remember there were some people who said, well, should you have everybody say whatever they want at all time, at any time? I mean, isn't there a certain danger in that as well? Because you do give people certain ideas. And on the other hand, the freedom of speech is a very, very important human right, right? It's one of the basic human rights. And we strongly believe that too. But yeah, we believe that in every society you have to find that balance. And in Dutch law, there are certain restrictions. The majority of people still feel comfortable with that. And, if Parliament or our Congress at some point doesn't feel comfortable with that, you can have a change in the law. But for the moment, I think the majority of people feels comfortable with the freedom of speech that we have, and with the few restrictions in the law, and the possibility to go to court if you feel that you have been offended.
Would you comment upon the what's going on in Russia and what our future is?
How long do I have? Russia is a very complex country. It's also a very interesting country. I think several things. They're in a difficult economic position right now. They had a lot of income from oil and gas, but they didn't invest it very much in productive industries. oil and gas prices go down, their income goes down, they're in economic difficulty. And Russians also like to spend it. When you have the money, you spend it. And as opposed to the Dutch, when you have the money, you first put it in the savings account and then you start thinking what to do with it. Both have its advantages and disadvantages. I think Russia developed greatly over the last few years. We also have our criticism. I mean, Russia is one of the countries where our government, we have good relations with, and we have a very close trade relation. We went there, you know, Tsar Peter the Great came to the Netherlands in the, when was it, 1500s, 1600s. He learned to build boats there. We exported, our ships went to the ports, to St. Petersburg, Leningrad as it became later. So we have very close trade relations. It's important for us. We import energy from Russia. We have had no trouble with their gas delivery to us. We do think it's important for Europe to start becoming more independent of just the Russian gas, so we are a believer in diversification. We want to make a gas hub in the Netherlands, for example, with Russian gas, but also Algerian gas, Norwegian gas, so you're not dependent on one source. So we think there's a, they're developing, I think, their economy slowly but gradually. I think in terms of human rights, we have a lot of concerns, and we discuss that also with them. We tell them. We think it's important to engage and not isolate them, because you know, when Russia feels isolated, they start doing things that we're not always happy with. So we believe very strongly in engagement. They're going to have problems with demographics as well. Their population is declining. It's a massive country. And we do think that the start that the Obama administration has made with the Russian government is a very good one. There's going to be consultations, big high-level meeting in July between President Obama, President Medvedev. The US is working on a new START agreement. We think that is very important too. And we think that the Russians can play a very important role in the region. For example, you will need to work with them on Iran, on nuclear weapons. So, you know, it's a complicated country, but it's a proud country. They're proud of their history. We need to take them seriously. We need to engage. But I think we also need to express what our values are and stand up for our values, such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. And there's still some way to go there.
This has been an extraordinarily informative evening. I think it's been marked by a great deal of integrity and frankness as well. It's been thoroughly enjoyable and very helpful to us. Thank you, Madam Ambassador.
Thank you.